تيار وطني مدني ديمقراطي.
ازدواجية السلاح الشرعي وغير الشرعي.
Good afternoon on this Thursday, August 15th. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. Egypt's army-backed interim prime minister defends the decision to order the crushing of protest camps. Analyst Claude Salhani weighs in live from Washington. Al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria claim they killed an Italian Jesuit priest named Paolo Dalloglio. And a controlled and deliberate operation. This is what Nasrallah is describing as he claims responsibility of the bombs that left 4 Israelis wounded last week. Egypt's army-backed interim prime minister defends the government's decision to order the crushing of protest camps of thousands of supporters of the deposed President Mohamed Morsi, saying the authorities had no choice but to act. When we say that the speech about freedoms and freedom of expression is transformed into terrorizing the public and into carrying arms and blocking roads and violating public property, as well as blocking the interests of people, then it is not freedom of expression. It becomes a violation of the pride of the state, not just the people, according to Egypt's interim prime minister, Hazem al-Biblawi. This is what he said in a televised speech. This comes as the interim vice president, Mohamed al-Baradei, resigned after the violent clampdown, saying peaceful means could still have been found to end the confrontation, but other members of the government have rallied behind the decision to use force. At least 464 people were killed in nationwide violence sparked by the crackdown on the protest camps of supporters of President Mohamed Morsi, according to government officials. At least 421 of those were civilians. And according to ministry spokesman Mohamed Fasallah, 137 people had been killed in the main Rab'a al-Adawiyya camp, which pro-Morsi protesters had occupied for weeks. Among international reactions, British Prime Minister David Cameron said that Egypt needed a genuine transition to a genuine democracy and that violence would not solve the country's problems, while Australia's Foreign Minister Bob Carr condemned the violence, calling on the government to exercise restraint.
Looking more broadly at the situation in Egypt, this violence is not going to solve anything. What is required in Egypt is a genuine transition to a genuine democracy. That means compromise from all sides, the President, Morsi supporters, but also the military. That's what needs to happen. We don't support this violence. We condemn it completely. It's not going to solve the problems.
I feel very apprehensive about the future of Egypt. There are a lot of Egyptians in Australia of various faiths. We understand their concern about what's happening in the country they've come from. And that's why we underline the need for a peaceful resolution, a compromise between the military and the Muslim Brotherhood, and an end to the loss of life, the resort to violence. Respect for minorities, I think that's a very important theme that needs to be underlined as well.
Joining us now live from Washington, D.C. on the line is expert on the Arab Spring and political analyst Claude Salhani. Hello, Claude.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Rafa.
Hi. We heard the international community as well as regional authorities condemn the violence in Egypt. Do you think this much violence was needed on the protesters?
You know, I'm going to echo what was just said and what all the heads of states and government have been saying since yesterday, is that violence is not going to solve anything. On the contrary, it generates more violence. And I'm afraid that in Egypt what we're seeing is quite possibly a repetition of what happened in Iran in 1979. It was violence, killings, funerals, more violence, more demonstrations, more counter demonstrations, and it just feeds upon itself like an ugly beast, and we get to the point where it just is total mayhem, total chaos. The opposition has called for a big demonstration tomorrow, Friday, after the Friday prayers. That's typically when things tend to go sour.
Right, the demonstrators, they're demanding the reinstatement of the deposed leader, Mohamed Morsi, who was removed by the military on the 3rd of July, and the Justice Department keeps extending the time where he could be released or he could be tried. And do you think this is what's angering them?
No, I think what's angering them, and rightfully so, is the fact that they had an officially elected president, democratically elected president. They played the democratic card, and they won, and they got their president elected. And then the others, the army, the military, and the opposition to Morsi changes the goalposts during the game, and that's what's upsetting them.
Well, what can we expect now from Egypt?
What can I expect? I think we have to see what happens tomorrow. Today seems to be quiet.
Is there? I know Cairo is quiet right now, but let me rephrase the question. Because you are in Washington, D.C., can you tell me what's Washington's expectations and what is their stance on the conflict as it stands today?
Yeah. Well, yesterday, John Kerry, the Secretary of State, was quite adamant, and he said violence is not the answer. It was deplorable. And then he called for a quick and immediate end to the state of emergency, saying that the state of emergency is not the way to go. But Washington is really now, the administration in Washington is worried that Congress is not going to allow it to continue funding the $1.6 billion of yearly aid that Washington gives to Egypt. And that could sour relations with the military, could sour relations with the government.
But haven't the relations already soured, Claude?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Haven't the you were saying that they're soured, they're afraid that it's going to sour their relations with Egypt, but aren't the relations already soured?
Not to the point that, Washington can still count on Egypt for major political issues. And so they're still quite allied, and the money hasn't stopped, and the training to the army hasn't stopped, and the hardware to the army hasn't really stopped yet. Washington has still not recognized what happened.
Right. Washington is condemning the violence, but they're not really being explicit about where they stand in terms of who they're supporting. I mean, they obviously support peaceful demonstrations, but Morsi was elected, but he was also ousted. Before there was a large part of the population that wanted him, and not anymore as it stands today. So Washington's stance has shifted. Am I correct?
Well, Washington is caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they have to support democracy because that's what they've been talking about all this time. That's why they invaded, quote unquote, why they invaded Iraq and Afghanistan was to bring about democracy. Now, in Egypt, they're caught between promoting democracy, sustaining democracy, and not really being a great fan of the Muslim Brotherhood. So they are kind of lost between the two, and not knowing exactly what to do. I think a typical explanation of Washington's position was when the two senators, McCain and Graham, went to Egypt and started preaching about democracy to them. It was embarrassing almost.
So we have to wait and see what happens tomorrow then.
I think tomorrow will be the test day. If tomorrow goes smoothly, I think we're out of the woods, sort of. I mean, we're beginning to...
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Claude, for being with us. Fortunately, that's all the time we have right now, and we look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you for calling us. Al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria claim they killed an Italian Jesuit priest who disappeared in the east of the country late last month. This is according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Paolo Dalloglio, a vocal supporter of the uprising against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and some Islamist rebel groups, disappeared in the rebel-held city of Raqqa on July 29th. In September of 2012, while visiting the French foreign minister in Paris, Dalloglio said, "The world, so to speak, and I'm speaking as a Syrian, has abandoned us to our fate. We have been condemned to a civil war. Our democratic revolution has been silenced with blood. Diplomacy has not found the means to make Russia and Iran let Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship fall." The British-based monitoring group cited local activists in the city of Raqqa with close links to Dalloglio as saying he was killed while being held by fighters from the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. Coming up next, Obama's aide reveals what the U.S. president was doing when bin Laden was killed, and it has to do with playing cards. Stay with us. Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is claiming responsibility for explosions which wounded 4 Israeli soldiers who infiltrated into southern Lebanon last week. Nasrallah told Al Mayadeen television that Hezbollah fighters planted bombs in an area they knew in advance Israeli soldiers would pass through, and detonated one of them when a first group of special forces reached the area. A second bomb was triggered when Israeli reinforcements arrived on the scene. Nasrallah said, giving the group's first account of an incident about which Israeli military officials have given very few details. It was a controlled and deliberate operation, not an accidental one, Nasrallah said. As he said that he did not say how the Hezbollah fighters knew in advance of the Israeli incursion, but said the group will not accept these territorial violations into the country. Kataib Party MP Sami Jmail is criticizing Hezbollah MP Mohammed Raad's statements regarding the Babda Declaration. Those who signed the Babda Declaration then describe it merely as ink on paper, consider that the Lebanese who are dying in Syria are only ink on paper, Jmail said in a tweet. In June of 2012, a national dialogue session approved the Babda Declaration that demands that Lebanon disassociate itself from regional conflicts. On Wednesday, however, Raad considered that the Babda Declaration was born dead, accusing political factions in the country of hindering the commitment to national agreements. Raad said that all what was left from the Babda Declaration is ink on paper. Although Lebanon is officially neutral in Syria's war, it is split over the revolt against President Assad. Hezbollah has openly sent fighters to battle alongside the Syrian regime, against rebels trying to overthrow Assad. Israeli and Palestinian negotiators have reconvened U.S.-brokered peace talks in Jerusalem amid low expectations and dodged by plans for more Jewish settler homes on occupied territory. An Israeli official said the parties agreed to meet again soon. However, no details were given on the subject matter of the talks. The parties have agreed to refrain from revealing information in order to raise the chances for success. On Wednesday, Israel freed 26 Palestinians jailed between 1985 and 2001, many for deadly attacks on Israelis. The release, coupled with President Mahmoud Abbas's dropping of a demand for a settlement freeze before talks could begin, helped to pave the way towards negotiations. The resumption of negotiations, however, after a first round in Washington last month that ended a 3-year standoff over a Jewish settlement building, followed Palestinian celebrations overnight. And in Iraq, a wave of car bombs in the capital killed 31 people and wounded dozens, the latest attack in a month-long surge in violence. Attacks have been on the rise in Iraq since a deadly security crackdown in April on a protest camp. More than 3,000 people have been killed in violence during the past few months, raising fears that Iraq could see a new round of widespread sectarian bloodshed, similar to that which brought the country to the edge of civil war back in 2006 and 2007. In the deadliest of the blast across Baghdad, police said one bomb struck near a bus station in the northern neighborhood of Khazimiyya, killing 8 and wounding 18. News around the world in brief. Japan marks the 68th anniversary of its surrender in World War II, with somber ceremonies and visits by senior politicians to a shrine honoring 2.5 million war dead that remains a reminder of its colonial and wartime aggression. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, whose hawkish views have raised concerns in neighboring China and South Korea, appeared unlikely to visit Yasukuni Shrine, but asked an aide to present an ornamental offering brought with his own money. 2 of his cabinet members, decked out in morning suits, paid their respects at the shrine. And a former aide to President Barack Obama said he resorted to playing cards on the day Osama bin Laden was killed. Reggie Love, a personal assistant to Obama during the president's first term, said in a video that his boss opted not to watch the full live feed. Most people were down in the Situation Room, but he was like, I'm not going to be down there. I can't watch this entire thing. So he, myself, Pete Souza, the White House photographer, we must have played 15 games of spades. Love made the comments in an interview at the University of California on July 18th, according to New York Magazine. This is how we end our bulletin. Let me remind you of today's top stories. Nasrallah's description as he claims responsibility of the bombs that left 4 Israelis wounded. Al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria claim they killed an Italian Jesuit priest called Paolo Dell'Aguio. And Egypt's army backed interim prime minister defends the decision to order the crushing of protest camps. Analyst Claude Salhani weighs in live from Washington. See you again tomorrow for all the latest here in Lebanon and around the world on Future Television at 4:20.
احنا تيار المستقبل، تيار وطني مدني ديمقراطي.
ازدواجية السلاح الشرعي وغير الشرعي.